The horn sounded 3 times, which meant retreat, and Yatul Bloodhorn spat on the smoldering ground and did not move. Around her, the warband was already breaking apart into streams of fleeing bodies, orcs throwing down torches, hauling wounded kin over their shoulders, screaming at each other in the old tongue to fall back to the mountains before the human levies regrouped. Smoke rolled thick across the trampled barley fields of Thornfield Crossing. Behind her, the border town still burned in 3 places, the fires her own warband had set an hour before in a raid gone wrong, a raid that had cost them their war chief and half their strength against a militia that fought far harder than any scout had promised. Bloodhorn, Grolka Ironjaw, the second in command, grabbed her arm hard enough to bruise. "The horn has sounded. We go now or we go never." "Then go," Yatul said. She stood in the middle of the smoking road with her spear planted in the dirt like a flag claiming ground no one else wanted. 6.5 feet of muscle and old scars. Her dark green skin streaked with soot and dried blood that was not entirely her own. Her tusks caught the firelight when she turned her head. She wore fitted leathers dyed the deep red-brown of dried clay, a warrior's cuirass laced tight over a body built for war. And if anyone had cared to notice beneath the blood and grime, undeniably beautiful strong shoulders, a narrow waist, powerful thighs wrapped in supple leather made to move fast and strike faster. A necklace of small bones rattled at her throat, trophies from battles fought before half the warband now fleeing had grown their first tusks. "There is a man pinned under a collapsed wagon by the granary," she said. "I am not leaving him to burn." Grolka's eyes went wide with something between fury and disbelief. "A human. You would die here for a human. I did not ask you to stay. The chief is dead. The warband is broken. If you are not on the mountain road by dawn, you are no warband of ours. You are nothing. You are prey for every farmer with a pitchfork between here and the ashwood." "Then I will be prey," Yatul said, and turned her back on her own people for the first time in 19 years of raiding, and walked toward the burning granary instead of away from it. She heard Grolka curse behind her, heard the retreat horn sound a 4th time, more urgent, and then heard only the crackle of fire and her own boots on the scorched earth. The warband's shadows thinned and scattered into the tree line to the north. She did not look back to watch them go. She had already made her choice, though she could not yet have said why, except that an hour before, in the chaos of the raid, she had seen a man doing something no soldier or farmer had ever done in front of her in 19 years of war. He had put down his axe to pull a screaming child out from under a burning cart, with an orc raider not 10 paces from his back, and he had done it without a single moment of hesitation, as though the child's life mattered more to him than his own, more than the battle, more than anything else in the burning world. She had almost put a spear through him for it. Instead, she had held her strike, and in the space of that single held breath, something in her chest had shifted that she did not yet have words for. Now the granary's near wall groaned and buckled, timbers cracking, and beneath a fallen support beam, a man's leg was pinned to the earth, his face pale with pain, sweat cutting clean lines through soot. He looked up and saw her coming through the smoke, an orc woman a full head taller than him with a spear in her fist, and his hand went instinctively to the long-handled axe lying just out of his reach. "Do not," Yatul said, planting her spear in the earth and dropping to one knee beside the beam. "I am not here to kill you. I am here so you do not die stupidly crushed under your own roof." "That is very reassuring," the man managed, teeth gritted. "Coming from an orc." "You are the one who saved the child," she said. It was not a question. His eyes, blue-gray like river stone, found hers through the haze. "You saw that." "I saw that." She set her shoulder against the beam. "Now I am going to lift this, and you are going to pull your leg free, and then we are both going to leave before this whole building comes down on us. Do you understand?" "I understand orcs don't usually stop to help the people they're burning out of house and home." "I am not most orcs," Yatul said and heaved. The beam groaned, lifted an inch, 2 enough. The man cried out but dragged his leg free, rolling clear just as the support gave way entirely, and the near wall of the granary collapsed inward in a gout of sparks and ash. Yatul caught him by the collar of his scorched shirt and hauled him bodily away from the wreck, both of them stumbling back into the open road, coughing, faces black with smoke. For a long moment they simply stared at each other in the firelight, an orc woman and a human man, kneeling together in the dirt of a border town that had tried to kill them both from opposite directions an hour before. "Emmett," he said finally, when he had breath enough. "Emmett Hunter." "Yatul Bloodhorn," she said. "You should be running with the rest of your warband, Yatul Bloodhorn. And you should be dead under that beam, Emmett Hunter. It seems neither of us is doing what we should." Somewhere behind them in the town proper, a bell began to ring, not the alarm bell that had rung through the raid, but a different one, a call to arms, men shouting that a raider was still among them, that one of the orc devils had not fled with the rest. Emmett's face went tight with alarm. "They will kill you," he said. "If they find you here, standing over a dead building with a spear, they will not ask why you stopped to help me. They will just kill you." "Then help me not be found," Yatul said, and there was something in the way she said it, not pleading, never pleading, but simply direct, laying the truth of the danger between them like a stone on a table, that made Emmett Hunter's decision for him before he had even finished thinking it through. "This way," he said, pulling himself upright despite the pain in his leg. "The mill, my mill. It is close, and it is mine, and no one will think to search a millwright's shed for an orc." She looked at him for one more heartbeat, weighing something behind her dark eyes that he could not read, and then she pulled her spear from the earth and followed him into the smoke. The mill stood at the edge of Thornfield Crossing where the fields gave way to the tree line, a squat stone building with a great wooden wheel turning slow and patient in the creek beside it, entirely untouched by the fires that had gutted half the town square. Inside it smelled of sawdust and linseed oil, and the particular clean smell of good wood, worlds away from the smoke and blood outside. Emmett Hunter barred the door behind them and lit a single lantern, keeping it low, and only then did he really look at her, at the size of her, the breadth of her shoulders in that fitted leather cuirass, the old scars crossing her forearms, the tusks that gleamed faintly ivory in the lantern light. "You could kill me right now," he said, not with fear exactly, more with a kind of tired honesty. "Easier than breathing." "I could," Yatul agreed. "I'm not going to." "Why not?" "Because you did not hesitate for that child," she said. "And because I am tired, Emmett Hunter, of being told who I am supposed to be by men who have never once looked at me and seen anything but a monster to kill or a monster to fear. You looked at me and saw neither." "I looked at you and saw someone who just saved my life," Emmett said. "That seemed like enough to be going on with." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched the corner of her mouth, quickly suppressed but not quite gone. "You are either very brave or very foolish, millwright." "My mother always said I could not tell the difference," he said, and this time she did smile, and it changed her whole face, softened the fierce lines of it, and Emmett Hunter felt something in his chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the ache of his bruised leg. Outside, the search party's shouts grew closer, torches visible through the shuttered window as men moved from building to building. Yatul's hand found the shaft of her spear, every muscle in her going still and coiled ready. "They will search the mill," Emmett said quietly. "It is close enough to the fires that they will not skip it." "Then I will go," Yatul said. "I did not ask you to shelter me past tonight, millwright. I only meant to see you safe." "You will go where?" His voice was sharper than he intended, and she looked at him with faint surprise. "Out into a field full of armed men hunting for the one orc who did not run. You would not make it 50 yards. I have survived worse odds." "I do not doubt it," he said, "but you do not have to survive them alone. Not tonight." He crossed to the far wall where great sacks of grain waited to be milled, hauled two aside to reveal a narrow gap behind them, barely wide enough for a grown man to squeeze through, let alone an orc woman of her size. "It will not be comfortable. But it will not be seen either." Yatul looked at the gap, looked at him, and something passed between them that was not quite trust yet, but was the beginning of it, a bridge being built plank by plank in the space of a single dangerous night. "Why," she said slowly, "would a human millwright risk his own neck hiding an orc raider in his grain store?" "Because you saved my life," Emmett said simply. "And because, orc or not, warband or not, I do not believe a person should die for the crime of being decent when the moment called for it. You had a warband retreating around you and a knife's reach of freedom, and you spent it on me instead. I am not going to let you die for that." She stared at him for a long moment, and in that lantern-lit mill, smelling of sawdust and grain dust and smoke drifting faint through the shutters, Yatul Bloodhorn made the second impossible choice of that impossible night. She folded herself down into the narrow gap behind the grain sacks, spear laid flat beside her, and let a human man she had known for less than an hour push the sacks back into place and hide her from the wrath of his own people. She did not know, crouched in the dark and the grain dust, listening to the shouts of the search party grow close and then recede, why she had trusted him. She only knew that some door inside her that had been shut and barred since she was old enough to hold a spear had, in the space of that single burning hour, come quietly open. The search party pounded on the mill door twice that night, and twice Emmett Hunter opened it himself, showed them his empty workshop, his idle lathe, his stacks of good seasoned oak and pine, and sent them on their way with nothing to find. Each time in the dark behind the grain sacks, Yatul Bloodhorn held her breath and her spear, and trusted a man she had known for the length of one burning hour with her life. By the time the last torch had passed and the shouting had faded toward the far end of town, the eastern sky beyond the shuttered window had gone the deep gray of very early morning. Emmett moved the sacks aside and Yatul climbed out, grain dust in her hair, joints stiff from crouching in a space built for men half her size. "They will search again come daylight," she said, "more thoroughly. I know." Emmett rubbed a hand over his face, exhaustion plain in the lines of him now that the danger had passed enough to let it show. "There is a hunting trail behind the mill that follows the creek up into the hill country. It is not much used. If you left before first light, you could be 3 miles gone before anyone thought to look past the town. You want me gone. I want you alive," he said. "Those are not the same thing, Yatul Bloodhorn, and I think you know it." She studied him in the lantern light, this ordinary man with sawdust in the creases of his hands and a bruised, swollen leg he was doing his best not to favor, who had hidden an orc in his grain store and lied to armed searchers twice in one night for a woman whose name he had learned only hours before. "Why do you care whether I live," she said, "when your own people would call you a traitor for it?" Emmett considered the question with the same unhurried care he seemed to give everything, as though words mattered too much to spend carelessly. "I have spent most of my life building things," he said finally. "Mills, wagons, roof beams, furniture. Things meant to last, meant to hold weight, meant to still be standing for other people long after I am gone. I have never once, in all that building, met a person who mattered as much in a single hour as you did tonight, pulling a beam off my leg with an entire town screaming for orc blood behind you. I do not know what that means yet, but I know I am not eager to see you dead over it." The words settled into her like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through parts of her she had thought long since armored over. No man, orc or human, had ever spoken to her like that, not with fear, not with lust, not with the wary respect owed to a dangerous thing, but with something that looked almost like wonder. "I will go before first light," she said at last. "But I will not forget this, millwright. Whatever else the world decides to call me, I do not forget a debt." "It was not a debt I was looking to collect," Emmett said. "No," Yatul agreed, and something warm and dangerous moved behind her dark eyes. "That is precisely why I intend to pay it." She left before the sun cleared the tree line, slipping out the mill's back door and along the creek trail into the hill country, and Emmett Hunter stood in his doorway a long time afterward, watching the place in the mist where she had disappeared, feeling for the first time in longer than he cared to admit that his quiet, solitary life had been cracked open by something enormous and irreversible. and that he did not want it closed again. 3 weeks passed, and Thornfield Crossing rebuilt what it could of itself. Emmett went back to his mill and his lathe, back to shaping fence posts and cart wheels and the great oak beams that held up half the barns in the valley, and told himself, without much success, that the orc woman he had hidden behind his grain sacks was a single strange night he would carry as a private memory, and nothing more. He did not expect to find her waiting for him at the mill pond at dusk on the 22nd day, seated on a flat stone at the water's edge as easily as if she owned the place, her spear laid across her knees, watching the wheel turn. "You came back," Emmett said, more breath than voice. "I told you I do not forget a debt." Yatul rose, and even in the fading light he could see she had changed little. The same fitted leathers, clean now of soot and blood, the same bone necklace at her throat, the same fierce, watchful beauty that had not left his thoughts in 3 weeks of trying to talk himself out of remembering it. "I have been 3 weeks in the hill country, millwright. Alone. My warband will not have me back. Word travels fast among the clans, and a warrior who abandons a retreat is named Oathbroken. There is no war camp that will take me now." "I am sorry," Emmett said, and meant it. "Do not be." She said it fiercely, almost as a challenge. "I did not stay for regret. I stayed because for 1 hour in a burning town, a human man looked at me as though I was worth staying for, and no one orc or human has ever looked at me that way in 19 years of war. I have thought of little else since." Emmett's breath caught. "Yatul, I am not asking you for shelter out of pity," she said, closing the distance between them with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had never once needed to beg for anything in her life. "I am not some broken thing for you to rescue, millwright. I could have gone north to the free clans in the deep wilds and made a new life there, spear for hire, and no one would have questioned it. I came back to Thornfield Crossing instead. To you, because I choose it. Because I choose you." The words hit him like a physical thing, and for a long moment Emmett simply stared at her, this magnificent, dangerous, breathtaking woman standing close enough now that he could feel the warmth of her, could see the flecks of amber in her dark eyes catching the last of the daylight, and could not for the life of him understand why a warrior like Yatul Bloodhorn would want anything at all to do with a plain, ordinary millwright with sawdust in his hair. "I do not have much to offer," he said finally, honestly. "A mill, a cottage with a leaking roof I keep meaning to fix. A town that would burn us both alive in the square if they knew you were standing here." "You offered me your grain store and your own neck 3 weeks ago," Yatul said. "That is more than most men, human or orc, have ever offered me in 19 years. She reached out, slow and deliberate, and laid one large, calloused hand against his jaw, tilting his face up toward hers with a gentleness that seemed strange coming from someone built for war. "I am not asking you to solve the danger I bring with me, Emmett Hunter. I am asking whether you want me to stay despite it." His heart was hammering so hard he was certain she could hear it. "Yes," he said, before he could think better of it, before caution or sense or every hard lesson Thornfield Crossing had ever taught him about orcs and humans, and the blood between them could talk him out of the single truest thing he had felt in years. "Yes, stay." She kissed him then, there at the edge of the mill pond in the fading light, and it was not gentle or hesitant. It was hungry, fierce, acclaiming as much as an invitation, her hand fisting in the front of his shirt to pull him up against her, and Emmett Hunter, ordinary millwright, found himself kissing an orc warrior back with a desperate certainty he had never once felt for any woman in his life, human or otherwise. When they finally broke apart, breathless, her forehead resting against his, Yatul said quietly, "Among my people, when a warrior chooses a mate, she does not ask permission. She claims him before witnesses if she can manage it and dares the world to argue." "There are no witnesses here," Emmett said. "No," Yatul agreed, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. "But there will be, because I do not intend to hide what I have chosen, millwright. Not from your town, not from my own kind if they ever come looking. I stayed for you. I mean for the whole world to know it." He should have been afraid of what that meant, of the danger it would bring down on both their heads in a border town still smoldering from an orc raid, still burying its dead, still hanging effigies of tusked monsters in the market square to burn on festival nights. He should have thought of all the reasons this was reckless, impossible, doomed. Instead, he thought only of the warmth of her hand still resting against his jaw and said, "Then let them know." That night Emmett Hunter did not sleep alone in his small cottage behind the mill. What passed between them was not slow or hesitant. 3 weeks of separation and longing had worn away whatever caution either of them might have clung to. And when Yatul followed him through his own front door and pulled it shut behind them with a soft, deliberate thud, there was no pretense left, only the truth of what they had both been circling since the burning granary. She was fierce and certain in the way she wanted him, unashamed of her own hunger, and he met her with a devotion that startled them both, gentle where she was fierce, patient where she was impatient, each of them discovering in the other something neither had known they were missing. By lantern light she traced the calluses on his hands, the marks of years spent shaping wood and stone, and told him, low and rough with feeling, that she had never once wanted a man's gentleness before him, had thought herself built only for violence and survival, and he answered by showing her, without a single word needed, that gentleness and strength were not opposites at all. It was reckless. It rewrote everything between them in the space of a single night, and neither one, waking tangled together as dawn crept gray through the shutters, wanted to undo a single moment of it. In the morning, Emmett rose before the sun to see to the mill wheel and found Yatul already awake, sitting up in the narrow bed with the blanket pooled around her waist, watching him with an expression he had not yet learned to name. "You are still here," he said, and could not quite keep the wonder from his voice. "I told you," she said. "I do not go back on a claim once it is made." She reached for him, pulled him back down beside her, and for a while the mill wheel turned unwatched outside while the two of them learned, slower now, less desperate, what it meant to belong to someone. Word of an orc living openly at the millwright's cottage did not take long to spread through Thornfield Crossing, and the reception was every bit as ugly as Emmett had feared. It began with whispers at the trading post, grew into muttered threats outside the tavern, and finally, on a gray autumn morning 6 weeks after that first night at the mill pond, exploded into the open when the town's reeve, a hard, sun-browned man named Oswin Carr, who had lost his own brother in the raid on Thornfield Crossing, stood up in the market square with a warrant scroll in his fist and accused Yatul Bloodhorn, in front of half the town, of murdering a farmhand found dead in his own field 2 nights before. "She's the only orc within 50 miles, Carr shouted, loud enough to carry across the whole square, where stalls of turnips and woven cloth and iron nails stood forgotten as the crowd turned as one toward the millwright's cottage road, where Emmett and Yatul had just arrived to trade grain for lamp oil. Found with his throat open like a raider does it, and everyone knows what she is. Everyone knows what her kind did to this town not 3 months past. I say we settle this the old way, before she opens the rest of us up in our beds." The crowd's mood turned like a flame catching dry grass, fear and grief and old hatred all finding a single target to pour themselves into. Someone threw a stone. It struck Yatul's shoulder and she did not flinch, did not reach for the spear she had left, at Emmett's careful urging back at the mill, only stood very still in the middle of the square with her chin lifted and her dark eyes moving across the crowd, marking faces, and Emmett felt something in his chest go cold with terror, not for himself, but entirely for her. "That is a lie," Yatul said, her voice carrying clear and steady over the growing murmur. "I have not killed a soul in this valley since the night of the raid, and that night I killed no farmhand, only fought soldiers who were trying to kill me. Would a monster admit otherwise?" Carr shouted, and the crowd surged closer, more stones lifting, pitchforks and hay hooks, and a few rusted swords appearing from nowhere the way weapons always seemed to when a mob decided it needed them. Emmett Hunter stepped between them. He put himself squarely in front of Yatul Bloodhorn, between her and the Reeves warrant scroll, between her and 40 angry townsfolk with stones and hooks in their hands, a millwright with sawdust still on his sleeve standing his ground against an entire town's fury with nothing in his hands at all. "Emmett, get out of the way," Carr said, more surprised than angry, at least for the moment. "This is not your fight." "It is entirely my fight," Emmett said, and his voice did not shake, though his heart was slamming against his ribs hard enough to hurt. "Yatul Bloodhorn has been at my mill or in this town for 6 weeks. I know where she has slept every one of those nights because she has slept beside me. She was not near Halbert Cray's field 2 nights past. She was home. With me." A ripple of shocked murmuring went through the crowd at that, the scandal of it briefly outweighing even the fear. "Then you're as much a fool as she is a murderer," someone shouted from the back, and another stone flew, this one aimed at Emmett rather than Yatul, and it was Yatul who moved then, faster than the crowd expected from something her size, catching the stone out of the air a hand's breadth from Emmett's face and letting it drop to the dirt at her feet. "You will not touch him," she said, and there was nothing playful left in her voice now, only a warning as cold and absolute as winter's stone. "Accuse me of what you like. I have survived worse than this town's fear, but the next hand raised against Emmett Hunter will lose more than a stone to throw with." The square went very quiet. "She threatens us in the open market," Carr said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. "That is confession enough for me." "It is not confession," said a new voice, cutting through the tension, and every head turned to see old Marin Pell, the town's midwife and one of the few people in Thornfield Crossing old enough and respected enough to be heard over a mob's fear, pushing her way to the front of the crowd. "I tended Halbert Cray's body myself before the Reeve ever saw it, and I will tell you all plainly what I told Oswin Carr in private 2 days ago, which he has apparently chosen to forget in front of a crowd. That wound was no orc blade. It was a hunting knife, narrow and single-edged, the kind every farmer in this valley owns. Halbert Cray was killed by a man's hand, not an orc's, and I would wager coin I do not have that whoever did it wanted this exact mob standing in this exact square today, looking for someone else to blame." The silence that followed was different from the first, heavier, uncertain, the crowd's fury faltering as it searched for a new direction and found none ready-made. "That is a lie meant to protect her," Carr said, "but weaker now," and Emmett heard in it the sound of a man who had built his accusation on grief and fear rather than fact, and was only now realizing how thin that foundation truly was. "Is it?" Marin said flatly. "Or is it that Halbert Cray owed you coin on a debt he'd been dodging for a season, Oswin, and an orc within 50 miles made for a very convenient throat to blame it on, instead of asking too many questions about who else might have wanted him dead?" Whatever answer Carr might have given was lost beneath the crowd's rising murmur, no longer united in a single fury, but splitting now into a dozen private doubts and whispered arguments, stones lowering, weapons uncertain in hands that had been so sure of their purpose a minute before. "I did not kill your farmhand," Yatul said again, into that uncertain quiet, and this time her voice held not defiance but something closer to weary honesty. "I know what I am to you. I know what my people did to this town, and I do not ask you to forgive that in an afternoon. But I will not be made to answer for a dead man I never met, killed by a knife I have never carried, simply because I am the easiest monster to blame." It was Emmett who broke the silence that followed, turning slowly to face the crowd rather than the Reeve alone, his voice pitched to carry the way Yatul's had. "I have lived in this town my whole life," he said. "Built half your barns, mended half your wagon wheels, buried my own father in your churchyard. You know me. You know I do not lie, and I am telling you before every one of you that this woman was with me the night Halbert Cray died, and that she has done nothing in 6 weeks but help me rebuild what the raid took from this mill, and hold her tongue against insults that would have made a lesser woman burn this whole square down around your ears. If you want to hang someone today, hang the truth of who actually held that knife. Do not hang her because it is easier than looking harder." The crowd's anger did not vanish. Old wounds and old fears did not disappear in a single square on a single gray morning, but it broke, fractured into uncertainty and shame, and in a few faces, something almost like respect for a man who had stood so plainly in the way of a mob for a woman the whole town had been ready to condemn. Oswin Carr lowered his warrant scroll, his jaw working, and after a long, taut moment, rolled it shut. "This is not settled," he said, though the fire had gone out of it. "But it will be settled properly, with Marin's evidence heard, not with stones in a market square." "That," Marin said, "is the first sensible thing you have said all morning." The crowd dispersed slowly, in twos and threes, muttering, throwing wary looks back at the orc woman still standing tall and unbowed in the center of the square, and at the millwright who had put his own body between her and their fear. When the square had emptied enough to breathe, Yatul turned to Emmett, and for the first time since he had known her, he saw something like fear flicker across her face, not for herself, but for him. "You could have been killed," she said, low and fierce. "Standing between me and 40 angry humans with stones in their hands. Do you understand what you risked?" "I understand exactly what I risked," Emmett said. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Her hands came up to frame his face, rough and gentle at once, and when she kissed him there in the half-emptied market square, in front of whatever eyes still lingered to see it, it was not a private thing anymore. It was a claim laid down in the open, the way her own people would have understood it before witnesses, daring the world to argue. The true murderer of Halbert Cray was found within the week, a rival farmhand with an old grudge and a debt of his own, caught trying to sell a stolen horse 2 towns over, and Marin Pell's testimony of the knife wound proved him out before the Reeves court without any need for Yatul to answer further for a crime she had never committed. Oswin Carr, to his credit, came to the mill himself to say as much, standing awkward and shamefaced in the millwright's yard. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Grief made me quick to blame, and I let that quickness near get an innocent woman killed in my own market square. I am sorry for it, Bloodhorn. That is not a thing I say lightly." "It is not forgotten," Yatul said, "but it is heard, and that for the Reeves seemed to be enough. Not every door in Thornfield Crossing opened easily after that. There were still cold looks at the trading post, still mothers who pulled their children away when Yatul passed, still men at the tavern who would not meet her eyes. But the worst of the town's fear had broken in the square that morning, cracked open by a millwright's plain refusal to let a mob have her, and slowly, over the weeks that followed, something like an uneasy peace began to take root where there had only been hatred before. It was not the town's acceptance that mattered most to Yatul, though. It was the quiet, steady certainty of Emmett Hunter, who had looked at 40 raised stones and chosen, without a moment's hesitation, to stand in front of her rather than step aside. The trouble that followed did not come from Thornfield Crossing at all, but from the north, from the deep wilds where the broken remnants of Yatul's old warband had scattered after the disastrous raid, and it arrived on a cold morning in early winter in the shape of a lone rider on a lathered horse, shouting Yatul's name across the mill pond before he had even reached the yard. Emmett was outside splitting firewood when the rider came into view, and Yatul, sharpening her spear on the cottage step, was on her feet before the man had reined in, spear already in hand, every line of her gone tense and watchful. "Grulka sends warning," the rider gasped, an old man, one of the few in the region who still traded with the scattered clans, someone Yatul recognized from years past as a neutral courier trusted by both sides of the border. "There is a bounty out on you, Bloodhorn. 200 silver marks, posted by what remains of your old war chief's kin, for the orc who broke retreat and named herself Oathbroken. They call it a matter of honor. They mean to hunt you down and make an example, and they have hired outriders from 3 clans to do it, mercenary spears who do not care whose blood they spill for silver." Emmett's axe stilled mid-swing. "How many?" "A dozen, perhaps more," the courier said. "Riding this way even now. I passed their trail 2 days north of here. You have little time, Bloodhorn, little time at all. Yatul's jaw tightened, but there was no fear in her, only the old, familiar calculation of a warrior weighing odds. Then I will meet them, she said, before they reach this town and put its people in danger for my sake. No, Emmett said, so sharply that both Yatul and the courier turned to look at him. You will not go alone to face a dozen mercenary spears over an old warband's wounded pride. Emmett, I did not stand in front of a mob in that square to watch you ride out and die alone in the woods a season later, he said, crossing the yard to stand before her, his hands closing over hers on the spear shaft. You said your people do not forget a debt. Neither do I. If they come for you, they come for both of us. This is not your fight, millwright, Yatul said, but there was no real conviction in it, only the same fierce worry he had first heard in the market square, worry for him rather than herself. You made it my fight the night I hid you behind my grain sacks, Emmett said. I'm not backing away from it now. They did not face the mercenary riders alone, in the end. Word spread fast through Thornfield Crossing that danger road toward the valley. Armed outriders hunting a bounty through farm country meant danger for every homestead between the tree line and the town gate, not only for the orc woman who had, over the past months, mended fences and hauled water and stood witness against a mob for the sake of the people who lived there. Oswin Carr himself organized a dozen townsmen with bows and pitchforks to stand watch along the northern road, not entirely for Yatul's sake, perhaps, but for their own homes and fields, and found, when the mercenary riders finally came thundering down out of the hill country on a gray morning 3 days later, that the two causes had become impossible to separate. The confrontation happened on the open road at the edge of Thornfield Crossing's northern field, 12 mercenary riders reining up hard before a line of armed townsfolk, and standing at the center of that line with her spear leveled and Emmett Hunter at her shoulder, an orc woman with nowhere left to run and no intention of running anyway. Stand aside, the lead rider called, a broad-shouldered orc mercenary with a notched axe and a scar bisecting one tusk. Our business is with the oathbroken, not with you soft-skinned farmers. Your business, Oswin Carr called back, his voice steadier than Emmett had ever heard it, is with a woman who has lived among us these past months and done this town more good than harm, which is more than I can say for the bounty riders trampling my winter wheat right now. You want her, you go through all of us first. All of you, the mercenary leader repeated, almost amused, looking along the ragged line of farmers and craftsmen with their borrowed weapons, clearly weighing the ease of simply riding through them. All of us, Emmett said, stepping half a pace forward level with Yatul, refusing to let her stand alone even now. And you should know, before you decide that is an easy fight, that the woman you have come to collect 200 silver marks for once held a burning granary beam off my leg with her bare hands rather than let me die under it. I have seen what she can do to men who threaten what she loves. I would not test it if I were the one holding an axe against her today. For a long, taut moment, nothing moved on that frozen field but the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. Then the mercenary leader's gaze slid from Emmett to Yatul, taking in, perhaps for the first time truly seeing, not an oath-broken warrior to be dragged back in chains for an old warband's wounded honor, but a woman standing rooted and certain among people who had chosen, however imperfectly, however recently, to stand and fight for her. 200 silver marks is a fair sum, he said slowly, but it is not worth 12 riders dying on a farmer's field for an old chief's grudge that half the clans have already forgotten. Bloodhorn broke a retreat. She did not break any oath that matters to men like us, who fight for coin and not for pride. He looked at Yatul a moment longer, something almost like respect passing over his scarred face. You found yourself a strange life, Bloodhorn, wed to a millwright and guarded by farmers. I hope it is worth the price you paid for it. It is, Yatul said, without a moment's hesitation. The mercenary leader gave a short, sharp laugh, wheeled his horse, and after a tense moment his riders followed, the whole company turning back north along the frozen road without another blow struck, the bounty abandoned as not worth the cost of collecting. The line of townsfolk did not cheer exactly. It was not that kind of town, not yet, not after everything the border had cost them. But there was a loosening in the shoulders of every man and woman standing there, a shared breath released, and more than one nod exchanged with the orc woman who had, in the space of a single tense morning, stood between their homes and a dozen hired spears as surely as she had once stood in their market square accused of murder. Oswin Carr walked over afterward, offered Yatul his hand, and after a moment's surprise she took it. "I do not think I will ever fully trust an orc the way I trust my own kin," he said, with the blunt honesty of a man who had decided lying about it served no one. "But I trust you, Bloodhorn. That is more than I thought I would ever say to anyone wearing tusks." "It is enough," Yatul said, and meant it. That night in the small cottage behind the mill, with the winter wind rattling the shutters and the fire burning low, Yatul sat on the edge of the bed working a whetstone along the edge of her spear, while Emmett watched her from across the room, mending a torn strap of harness leather with the same patient care he gave to everything he built. "You could have died today," she said, not looking up from her work. "For the second time since I have known you, standing on a field against a dozen armed riders for a woman your own town once tried to stone in the square." "I could have," Emmett agreed. "I did not. You take too many risks for me, millwright." "You held a burning beam off my leg with your bare hands," he said. "I think we are square on risks, Yatul Bloodhorn." He set the harness leather aside and crossed the small room to sit beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Besides, I told you once that I have spent my whole life building things meant to last. I did not know, until you walked out of that smoke 3 months ago, that I had never once built anything half so worth keeping as this." She set the spear aside then, and the whetstone, and turned to look at him with an expression that had, over the months, softened from the fierce watchfulness of their first meeting into something far more open, far more unguarded, a warrior's heart laid bare for a man she had once thought she would only ever know for a single burning hour. "Among my people," she said quietly, "there is a custom when a warrior wishes to bind herself to another beyond even the claim she has already made. A mark given and returned, sealed before witnesses if any can be found who will honor it. I do not know if any such witnesses remain for me now, Emmett Hunter. My warband is scattered, my old chief dead, my clan close to forgetting my name entirely." "You have witnesses," Emmett said. "A whole town of them, out on that field today, watching an orc woman refuse to run from a dozen armed riders for the sake of a life she built here. I do not think you need your old clan's blessing to know what you have built is real, Yatul. I think you already know it." She was quiet a long moment, studying him in the low firelight, and then she reached for his hand and pressed it, deliberately, over the old scar on her forearm, the mark of some battle fought long before she had ever set foot in Thornfield Crossing. "Then I will make the mark here instead," she said, "with you as both the one who receives it and the one who witnesses it given. That is not how it is usually done. But you are not usual, millwright, and neither is what we have made together." She drew a small, honed blade from her belt, and before he could protest, drew a careful, shallow line across her own palm, wincing only slightly, and held it out to him. "It is done in blood when it is done properly. A binding neither party can pretend to forget once it is made." Emmett looked at her offered hand, at the thin line of blood welling there, and understood without needing further explanation exactly what she was asking of him. He took the small blade from her, steadied his own hand though it trembled faintly, and drew a matching line across his own palm. "I do not know all the words that are supposed to go with this," he admitted. "Then use your own," Yatul said, pressing her palm to his, blood mingling between them, warm and real and undeniable. "I did not fall in love with a man who knew all the right ceremonies, Emmett Hunter. I fell in love with a man who stood between me and a mob, and between me and a dozen spears, and between me and every reason the world gave him to walk away. Say whatever is true, That will be enough." "I am yours," Emmett said, and his voice, though quiet, did not shake. "I was yours the night I hid you behind my grain sacks and lied to a search party twice before dawn, though I did not have the sense yet to know it. I will keep building whatever life we make together, Yatul Bloodhorn, for as long as you will let me, and I will stand between you and anything this world sends against you for exactly as long as I have breath to do it." "Then it is done," Yatul said, and her voice, for the first time since he had known her, was not fierce or watchful or coiled for danger, but simply, quietly, overwhelmingly full of feeling. "I claimed you first, millwright, in the dark of a burning night, before I had the sense to know what I was choosing. I am glad now to have earned the rest of it after." She kissed him then, slow and sure. No longer the desperate hunger of that first night at the mill pond, but something steadier, deeper. A promise renewed rather than a claim newly made. And outside the small cottage the winter wind kept blowing across the border fields, and the mill wheel turned on, patient and constant, through the dark. Spring came late to Thornfield Crossing that year, the frost lingering stubborn in the low fields until well past the customary planting weeks. But when it finally broke, it broke all at once, the whole valley turning green in the space of a fortnight, the mill pond thawing, the wheel turning faster with the swollen creek behind it. Yatul Bloodhorn had, by then, become as much a fixture of the town as the mill itself. She helped haul timber for the rebuilding of the granary that had burned the night they met, her strength making short work of loads that would have taken 4 men to shift. She stood godmother, in the town's rough estimation if not by any formal right, to old Marin Pell's grandchildren, who had lost their fear of her tusks somewhere over the winter and now trailed after her through the market square demanding to see her spear. Even Oswin Carr, gruff and unbending as ever, had taken to nodding to her by name when their paths crossed, a small thing, but not nothing, not after where they had started. Not every wound had healed. There were still nights Yatul woke with old grief pressing tight in her chest, mourning a warband and a war chief, and a life she had walked away from in a single burning hour. And Emmett had learned, over the months, simply to hold her through those nights rather than try to talk the grief away, understanding that some losses did not want fixing, only company. And there were still, on quiet evenings, moments when the weight of everything they had survived together caught up with both of them at once. The mob in the square, the mercenary riders on the frozen field, the long, uncertain months of a town learning, slowly and imperfectly, to see past old fear. It was on one such evening, a full season after that first burning night at the granary, that Emmett Hunter finished the last piece of the project he had been working on in secret for weeks in the back corner of his workshop, sanding it smooth by lantern light long after Yatul had gone to bed, and carried it out to the mill pond at dawn to wait for her. She found him there as the sun cleared the tree line, sitting on the same flat stone where she had waited for him a full season before, a wide, sturdy chair beside him, built of good seasoned oak, its arms carved with careful, patient detail, a spear crossed with a millwright's handplane, and beneath it in careful lettering both their names. "You built me a chair," Yatul said, half laughing, half something far softer, coming to stand beside him at the water's edge. "I built you a place," Emmett said. "At my table in my home for as long as you will have it. I know a chair is a strange thing to offer a warrior, Yatul Bloodhorn, but it is what I know how to make. Something meant to hold weight, something meant to last." He took her hand, the scar on her palm long since faded to a thin white line matching the one on his own. "I do not have any grand clan ceremony to offer you, no war chief's blessing, no bone necklace of my own to match yours. I only have this, a place at my table that is yours for exactly as long as we both live in this valley, and my whole heart alongside it for however much longer than that you will let me keep giving it to you." Yatul looked at the chair, at the careful carving of a spear crossed with a hand plane, at the man who had once put his body between her and a mob stones without a moment's hesitation, who had stood beside her against a dozen armed riders on a frozen field, who had learned, over one long, hard, beautiful season, to build a life sturdy enough to hold the both of them. "I refused my own warband's retreat for you," she said quietly, sitting down in the chair he had built her, testing its weight, its steadiness, finding it, as everything Emmett Hunter built, entirely sound. "I gave up the only life I had ever known, the only people who had ever called me kin, for 1 hour's certainty that you were worth staying for. I have never once regretted it, millwright. Not through the mob, not through the bounty riders, not through a single hard night since. You were the reason I stayed then. You are the reason I choose to stay still, every single day since." Emmett knelt beside the chair, taking both her hands in his, the mill wheel turning steady behind them, the mill pond catching the first full gold light of the new season. "Then stay," he said, the same word he had said to her at this same pond a full season before, and meant it now with everything a year of trial and danger and hard-won trust had taught him to mean. "Stay, Yatul Bloodhorn, not because you owe me a debt, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because I love you, plainly and completely, the way I have never loved anything else I have built in my whole life, and I want to spend whatever years I have left building the rest of it with you." "I already have," Yatul said, and pulled him up into the chair beside her, laughing at the tight fit of it, both of them wedged together on a seat built in truth for one, and found they did not mind the crowding in the least. "I already have, Emmett Hunter, and I do not intend to stop." The mill wheel turned on behind them, the border valley waking green and whole into another season, and on the flat stone at the water's edge, an orc warrior who had refused an entire warband's retreat for the sake of one ordinary, decent, extraordinary man sat wrapped in his arms, and for the first time since the night the granary burned, felt entirely, unshakably, joyfully home. They stayed like that a long while, until the sun was fully up and the first townsfolk were beginning to stir along the road toward the market square, and when Oswin Carr passed by on his morning walk, and saw the two of them tangled together in a too-small chair at the mill pond's edge, laughing at nothing in particular, he only shook his head, muttered something about millwrights and their strange notions of furniture, and went on his way without another word, because in Thornfield Crossing by that spring, an orc woman and a human man sharing a life together by the mill had, slowly and hard-won, simply become another true and settled part of how things were. And that, more than any grand ceremony or clan blessing could have given them, was the truest victory of all, not applause, not celebration, but the quiet, ordinary, permanent fact of belonging, built plank by plank and season by season, exactly the way Emmett Hunter built everything meant to last.